going to go ahead and call to order this workshop of the Board of Trustees of CSISD. I'd like to declare a quorum of 7 trustees present. Will take us to item 3, public comments. Ms. Horn, are there any? Shockingly, there are none. We'll go to item 4, to our workshop session. Item 1 is consideration, discussion, and possible action related to setting a date for the next management oversight workshop to discuss the district's system of purchasing. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent and board members. Of course, you're all aware that policy BAA local requires the district provide a report to the board each semester over one of its major operating systems. The purchasing department is up next for oversight reporting. We've shared several dates with you over the course of the last few weeks, so we need to kind of narrow that down and come to consensus for that oversight reporting date and time. So probably the best way, well, let me review these again for you real quick. Thursday, October 7th, Tuesday, October 12th, and Monday, October 25th. We have traditionally handled these around the lunch hour, 11 to 1. I assume that's still okay with everyone. So I have 3 dates that are out there for possible consideration. Maybe we should start if there's one that doesn't work for the group and go from there. Or if there's a preference, and we'll just start working our way through those.
October 25th, I'm out of town.
And I can't do October 12th. Well, that works for everybody.
Process of elimination. Is everyone available for Thursday, October 7th? Is that doable for the group?
Absolutely.
There you go. See, perfect. Thursday, October 7th, it is 11 to 1. So we'll reach out to you prior to that, take care of lunch orders, and we'll do that here in the boardroom. Thursday, October 7th, 11 to 1, management oversight from purchasing department. There you go, Mr. Nugent.
All right, that was quick. Let's go to number 2, consideration discussion regarding the implementation of House Bill 4545 and associated accelerated instruction in the 2021-22 school year. Mr. Martindale.
Yes, sir. House Bill 4545 recently passed in the latest regular legislative session. The bill is established new requirements for accelerated instruction for students who did not pass the most recent administration of STAR. Here with a more detailed look at the district's efforts associated with 4545 is our Executive Director of Secondary Education, Ms. Tiffany Parkerson. Tiffany?
Just assumed it was. There we go. Okay. Good evening. As Mr. Martindale noted, this report is to update you on the progress of our implementation of the requirements related to new legislation in House Bill 4545. So you may recall in our legislative update last month, we gave you the broad overview, and tonight we'll share our progress in complying with those requirements. So just as a refresher, some key points here about House Bill 4545. First of all, this is the legislation that eliminates the grade retention and retesting requirements for grades 5 and 8 that were previously covered under the Student Success Initiative umbrella. That also required us to hold grade placement committees for students at those levels, and we no longer have that requirement, but it has been replaced with the accelerated learning committees at grades 5 and 8 with the addition of also holding those for grade 3. And so the purpose of that committee is to meet and establish an accelerated learning plan for each individual student based on their STAR performance in the spring test administration. This is applicable to all students in grades 3 through 8 who do not pass a STAR test, as well as all students who do not pass an end of course exam. And we have 2 options as to how we can meet our students' needs. The first option is to provide supplemental instruction, also called tutoring and accelerated instruction at various points in the guidance. So I will use all of those interchangeably, either before or after school or during the school day when outside of the regular instruction provided, outside of when we're giving the regular curriculum. Or we could place students in a certified master, exemplary, or recognized teacher once we are eligible to do so through the teacher incentive allotment designation program. And we are in our data capture year for that, as you may recall. So we're working toward being able to have students or teachers with those designations so that we can place students in their classrooms long term. As far as the requirements, they are quite lengthy, so here is a broad overview. For each of our students, we are creating an accelerated learning plan that defines the skills focus area based on their STAR performance. So that instruction has to be targeted based on the TEKS and the needs that those students have based on their performance on the STAR test. It should supplement normal instruction, not replace. And once again, that is a 30-hour minimum requirement of tutoring per test that the student did not meet the standard on. So we also need to do this individually or in a group of no more than 3 students. However, the guidance has allowed the caveat of having families be able to sign a waiver for us to have larger group sizes. And so we have pursued that caveat, and we do have most families who are comfortable with having a slightly larger ratio. And then, of course, we are planning our groups based on student needs. So we will have some students who are served in that 1-to-3 ratio. We also may have some students who are really close to approaches, and we can suitably serve their needs in a larger group size as well. Additionally, ideally, we would like to have one person with that student throughout their tutoring process for the length of their 30 hours. As much as possible. We can use a variety of tutor sources. It does not just have to be a certified teacher. However, they do need to be trained in the use of the materials that we're using with our students. Additionally, we cannot remove students from instruction in grade level content or instruction in any enrichment class, any kind of a elective course, PE, fine arts, CTE, et cetera. So their regular schedule must be maintained. And we cannot remove them from recess or physical activity as well. So that does limit us to those time windows that we mentioned previously of before school or after school. And then most of our secondary campuses do have an advisory where we are able to utilize that time as well. So the next few slides are here to show you just the scale and the number of students at each grade level that we are serving to meet their needs through the accelerated instruction program. So the first slide here shows our current 4th graders. Remember that this tutoring is based on their 3rd grade STAR test. And at that level, they have reading and math. And so you can see the total raw number at the top in bold. And then beneath that is the percentage of our total district-wide students who did not meet the passing standard on the STAR test. And so looking at it this way is a slightly different lens from how we usually look at our STAR data. We are usually looking at our students who approaches meet masters. And so in this scenario, that's 81% of our students pass the test, right? But when we look at it from the reverse perspective, 19% didn't, and that's 173 students who need that 30 hours according to House Bill 4545 of targeted supplemental instruction. So I'm not going to do this on all levels, but just a little quick math here with this 4th grade reading group. Those 173 students times 30 hours each, that's over 5,000 hours of tutoring for that set of students. So additionally, you can see the information for our 4th grade math there as well. With intermediate, we have reading, writing, and math for our current 5th graders that we need to provide those tutorials for. But there is, once again, another caveat here. The state has decided to discontinue the STAR writing tests henceforth, and they will be integrated into one broader ELA exam long term. So if a student did not pass or did not meet on the writing test and did not meet the passing standard on the reading test, then those students only need the 30 hours of supplemental instruction for reading. However, if they only did not meet the standard on the writing test, then we do still need to supply that intervention for them in that area.
Tiffany, quick, just for clarification, 268 in reading, 352, 243, there could be overlap with students. Those are not necessarily different individuals.
You are correct. Those are not, these are distinct tests, but not distinct individual students. So we do have quite a few students who, based on the way the legislation is written, would need to receive 90 hours, or actually technically 60 in this group since we do get to cancel those out of this supplemental instruction. I also just feel like I would like to share anecdotally on the writing test. You know, we had a group of students heading into a test that we publicly knew would be no more. And so I think that informed our performance here, perhaps, when you look at that high rate or higher rate than what we're used to on our standardized testing.
Also, did these kiddos, so the current fifth graders, they did not take the STAR test in third grade.
Right.
Is that correct? So their first administration was in fourth grade.
Yes.
So the previous, okay.
So this was their first STAR experience, and so I think that is a very important point. I'm glad that you noted that. At the middle level, our seventh graders have reading and math tests to remediate from the sixth grade. And then once again, our current eighth graders have that same caveat with reading and writing, where both are not required if they did not pass both meet passing standards on both tests. High school becomes a little bit different. I tried to get them on one slide and it just wouldn't fit. And so we have two different opportunities here at the high school. We have our current ninth graders who, all of this is based on their eighth grade STAR tests. Note that this is the first level at which we also add social studies as an area to provide accelerated instruction in as well. And they also have the end of course exams. And so students in the end of course exam subjects, some of them are first time testers. The retesters are also included in this number as well. One of the positives about the end of course exam is that they have maintained our retesting opportunities. So we will share in the public hearing a little bit later that some of these students, even after the summer administration, have been removed from this number because they were able to show that they approached the standard and passed the test. Additionally, they'll have another opportunity in December, and if they are able to meet the passing standard, which is approaches, then once again, whether it's 5 hours or 15 hours, however many hours of the accelerated instruction they have completed, once they have met that requirement, they're able to be dismissed from the program.
Can I ask on this high school one, though, these were eighth graders who took those courses? Not that one, the one with the end of course, which would be end of course exams.
You have a good eye. I missed that edit. So these are not the current eighth graders on this slide. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
But were they eighth graders when they took end of courses?
No.
No, okay.
No. End of courses is once they're in high school. We did, for the very first time, have a couple of students who took Algebra 1 EOCs in the eighth grade who did not meet standard, but it would be less than a handful of these. So yes, ma'am. So thank you for that clarifying question. These would be current high school students taking the tests primarily at the high school level.
I was just thinking they didn't need to be taking that in eighth grade then, if we had that many failings. So,
yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay. So as far as moving forward, I shared in the report, the legislative update last month, that TEA has continued to add guidance, and part of that includes their expectation for us to hear in year one with the just lack of turnaround time between legislation being passed in June and implementation here in the school year, that we are going to continue to work toward meeting these requirements throughout the year, and we have a little bit of a grace period as we're working through this process. So at this point, we are implementing that ratio waiver process. Most of our intermediate and middle school, for examples, took care of this during registration, but other levels, it's coming a little bit later, just depending on their campus needs. We are conducting those accelerated learning committees that were mentioned previously to finalize plans for our students who are served through special education. Remember that that is their ARD committee who will serve as their ALC. As far as carving out the time to make this happen, our intermediate and middle levels are primarily maximizing that advisory time, which is a pocket of 30 minutes a day that each student has, where they're creating their groups and maximizing their staffing and shuttling students into different situations to make sure that we are able to accommodate their needs during the school day. For the elementary and the high school levels, most of them are using a before or after school tutorial schedule. At the high school level, it's quite common for students to stay after for tutorials and ride a late bus. And so they're maximizing that pattern that many students already have. Additionally, at the elementary level, they are working on some special schedules that still allow for students to have their core curriculum and all the electives needs met, but also carving out pockets of time like that advisory to be able to do this within the school day. So all of that to say, this has taken a lot of collaboration and creative thinking across the district as we're working toward meeting our students' needs and growing them through this program. That leads really into the next bullet of prioritizing and organizing groups. As you've seen our number of students who we need to serve, we have a wide variety of needs represented in that group. And so our principals and their campus leadership teams have been combing through the data and looking at MAP in addition to this for those levels that have that and other data points to really look at the student's entire situation and make sure that we are prioritizing, who do we need to get going toward their 30 hours first and working from there. And we also are in the process of hiring tutors and organizing volunteers for additional support. So we are very fortunate to live in a collegiate community. And so we've been maximizing our network with Blinn College and, of course, Texas A&M in volunteers, but also in being able to hire tutors, especially those who are interested in being educators. This is a great avenue for them to engage with students and get some experience in that way. As far as our resources, later on tonight on the board agenda, we have these two adaptable electronic programs, both of which would be funded through ESSER 3 funds. So even before House Bill 4545 came into play, Education Galaxy and Liftoff were used at 7 of our 10 elementary campuses, and they were paying for that from their campus budget. And so this would enable us to ensure that all 10 campuses have access to this adaptable program that does integrate with MAP and create customized pathways that really meet a student's need in ways that are engaging and interesting. And so while we will be using this for House Bill 4545, all of our students in our elementary schools also have access. So it's another avenue through which we can make sure that our students who may need that extra intervention are participating in similar activities, but getting the just right, just in time intervention that they need through that program. Similarly, Study Island would be the intermediate and middle level adaptable program. This platform was chosen rather than continuing with Education Galaxy because through the conversations with our campuses, our principals at that level, once a student uses something all of elementary and they go to a big intermediate school, like they want something to look different and feel different. And the interface on Study Island is much more mature and designed for those older learners as well, but it meets that same need. I also would like to note that pretty shortly after moving into this position last spring, there was a great desire from the intermediate and middle levels already to find something that would do this. We did have some computer programs, but they did not adapt to the student needs. If a student showed mastery of a content area, they still had to forge ahead through the next 10 activities. And so this will allow them to set their pace and have that customized experience. In addition, with that ESSER 3 funding, each campus has an allotment to be spent on tutoring that I mentioned previously. And we also have an opportunity to augment our funding for tutoring through the Texas COVID Learning Acceleration Supports Grant, which Dr. Trammell just recently received notice of us receiving this funding, and we are forging ahead to gain a better understanding of all of the steps it will take for us to actually get to the point where we're able to use the funds and implement it. So I know more information will be shared about that soon as we learn more. And then the additional layer of resources here that I wanted to make sure to point out is that progress monitoring is the key piece. This is about, let me clarify. The way this aligns with our vision and our philosophy is that this is about continued growth of our kids. And so certainly we need to do what the legislation has asked us to do, but we're really coming at this from the lens of giving our students what they need and making sure everyone is learning at the pace at which we would like them to and growing. And so a key component of that is continuing to leverage the NWEA MAP growth testing in grades K through 8. And then for our grade levels that do not have MAP tests at this time, our plan is to utilize those STAR release tests because we are measuring their STAR performance here. But also, Performance Matters is our new assessment and analytics platform that we are implementing as part of our strategic plan and for MTSS. And we are also going to be able to use that with the test banks and the analytics and the progress monitoring piece to make sure that our students are progressing and that our interventions really are doing what we desire them to do in growing our kids. We do have challenges with this. As noted, we do have a large number of students to serve through the program, and there are logistical concerns to work through with that. With staffing, we have all lived through the last 18 to 20 months firsthand here together, and our educators have already been doing incredible things for kids and for our community. And now with the requirements of House Bill 4545, they are taking on a new challenge, and we are very cognizant of that. Of course, time, there's never enough of in the first place, and now we've been limited to certain pockets of time that we're able to use. And then just big picture, it's challenging to balance House Bill 45 with our other priorities. We have begun great work with the strategic plan and developing our multi-tier system of supports and leveraging other strategies to elevate the outcomes of our underperforming students. And so ultimately, I'm going to go back to the silver lining here is that this work does ultimately support all of those outcomes that we are striving for. It's just taking us down a path that we may not have chosen on our own. May have taken a different tack, if you will. Okay. The last challenge is evolving implementation guidance. Since the end of June, beginning of July, the FAQ has blossomed from TEA from about 11 pages to over 30. And at last glance, it was over 90 questions of FAQ. And so I firmly believe that the adage from Shakespeare, wisely and slow, they stumble that run fast, is so true here, because as we make each move, inevitably the next week something new comes out within our guidance, and we need to adapt to it as well. So,
Tiffany, can you go back a slide, please?
Yes, sir.
So you put this nicely, evolving implementation guidance. In other words, the FAQ for TEA, since this has come out, has evolved to over 90 questions in the FAQ, correct? So
Yes, sir.
it can change a little bit on us each time we have a commissioner's call, which is supposed to be every other Thursday, but on occasion happens the off weeks as well.
Yes.
So this is ever changing. It does, and you touched on this, it does indirectly, like you said, maybe not necessarily the path we would have chosen, but it does very much support I'm thinking in particular Go 2 of our strategic plan, for sure. Right.
Yes, sir.
So there's alignment there and effort to kind of support that work we would have been doing, albeit maybe approached it in a different manner, but it supports our students nonetheless and helps us provide them that additional support for their academic performance. I did want to ask you this, the tutoring component and the workload of our teachers, if they engage in that additional support or the tutoring, we would compensate them accordingly as well if they do this work outside their regular contracted time, or how do we have that structured?
So depending on the structure that the school is implementing, we have different models, but yes, we're working to be able to compensate our teachers for their work. So for the campuses where the actual tutoring is taking place during the school day, we have a plan for them to be compensated for outside of the school day hours through that same tutoring allotment. As far as their training and their weekly planning needed, their data management, all of those sorts of things outside of the school day. Additionally, teachers who choose to be the tutors after school in those programs or before school, then they are also eligible for additional compensation.
So I just want to say that I really appreciate, and this comes up often, I really appreciate how adaptable all of you guys are. And I have no doubt that y'all are going to do great with this. And also not losing sight of our core beliefs and commitments with, community-based accountability and also our strategic plan. So I love the way that you talk about it and that you see how it does all connect, and that we're making all of this come together and not forget about those other commitments that we've made as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then did I understand correctly, currently funded with ESSER 3 funds and the T-cell grant, but the state mandated it without long-term state funding?
Yes, sir. That is a
So we'll
correct
have to look to the
understanding.
future for funding this ourselves.
Indeed, and as we look to the future, related to that, we are going to need to take a look at our summer programs because we can count those hours toward a student's 30 hours. And so that's going to really cause a lot of reflection and refinement this year as we plan for our summer programs. We do have some students who whose families did sign the waiver to allow us to use our summer program from last year to count toward their hours. But I'll give you an example of like at intermediate, they did both math and reading intervention. And so those students, if they attended every day, may have 15 hours accumulated already in reading and 15 in math. And so we need to really think strategically long-term about how we can leverage that pocket of time and then who gets served through the school year to meet the rest of their hours and so forth. But to go back to your original question, yes, sir, we're also going to need to evaluate our funding sources long-term when we no longer have access to those ESSER 3 funds in the T-class grant.
To your point, Mr. Hall, yes, this is an unfunded mandate. With that being said, this, if there is one, at least it's directed the right direction in this case. And there are others that maybe are not as purposeful or impact the kids in the positive manner that it could as much as 45-45.
I appreciate that. And I kind of was thinking like you, Mr. Hall, about the long term. I mean, we obviously know that anything can change at the next legislative session, but it does look like something like this may be around.
There
For a while?
was a bill in the second legislative session this summer that we were watching very, very closely, but it did not make it out of that session that would have scaled this back to reading and math only. And so it's not in the list of legislative priorities for the third session. But I'm always a dreamer and a hoper, so we'll keep our eye out on it. But I don't anticipate there being any change currently. But as you said, every biennium, this will get reevaluated potentially and change.
Well, along those lines, kind of besides obviously the funding piece, but you had to talk a lot about how we're fitting these time in there. The summer school is part of it, and certainly maybe too early to know, but has there been any discussion about even schedule changes on campus to accommodate this more moving forward?
The short answer is yes. We have, even as early as in July in our initial conversations, have looked at different bell schedules and different creative solutions. And so that'll be part of our long-term conversation as well, as how to potentially reimagine our school day to have more flexibility to serve students in a variety of ways. But that plane has not landed yet, not anywhere close.
It's because the FAQ keeps growing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's other. Yeah, I don't know if you want to adjust when you don't know what could change. And I certainly agree with Ms. Nolan that you guys are amazing with all that, and we'll be able to pull this off. But I can do the math too. That is so many hours over this next year. That is quite amazing. So, thank you. Oh.
Well, and as a whole, our students, or percentage-wise, collectively do fairly well. So it still, though, lots of work. Hats off to these folks and our campus administrators and our teachers as they think about how to address these particular needs outlined in 4545. But again, I think the silver lining is it does support some of our work that we identify with our strategic plan, absolutely. So thank you to all these folks' work as they've structured this and built this as we've gone into the school year.
Yes.
All right, anything else? Ms. Parkerson, thank you so much. It's going to take us to item 3, consideration discussion regarding state and local systems of accountability, including the district's community-based accountability system. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Nugent. Here to share changes associated with this year's state accountability system and a report on our most recent community-based accountability results is Ms. Molly Perry, our Chief Administrative Officer. Ms. Perry?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Martindale, Mr. Nugent, members of the board. It has been a little while since we've talked a lot about state and local accountability. So this evening, I plan to bring you all up to speed on where we are and where we're going next with both of those systems in one fell swoop. So let's start it up with some state accountability. So it seems hard to believe, but it has now been 4 years since the A through F accountability system was initially implemented. In 2018, we were first receiving that A through F rating as a district, but as you may recall, at that point, our campuses continued to receive that general rating of either met standard or improvement required. The following year, 2019, all campuses and districts did receive that A through F rating, but then in 2020, due to the lack of state assessment and all of the school closures associated with the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, districts and campuses were not rated, declared state of disaster. The short story is that has continued again for this year in terms of campus and district ratings. However, I do think it's important that we spend just a few moments revisiting that system, because even though districts were not rated, the information is compiled and it's available online. In terms of how campuses and districts fared, although there were definitely difficulties in comparing because participation rates did vary pretty significantly across the state as relative to us. So it is a 3-domain system. They have not changed that. We know that we've got the student achievement component, the school progress, and closing the gaps. In terms of the ratings, each of the domains do receive an A through F grade. However, that overall rating for a campus or a district is based on a calculation of either student achievement or school progress, whichever is best, at a weight of 70%, and then closing the gaps at 30%. What are those domains, you might ask? Well, let's do a quick review. Domain 1, student achievement for our elementary and middle schools, is all based on STAR performance. For our high schools, as well as the district as a whole, STAR does weight in at 40% overall, with college career and military readiness, or CCMR, at another 40%, and then graduation rates at 20%. Domain 2 actually has two components, and much like the overall rating, your performance in Domain 2 ultimately is based on whichever one you performed better in. So academic growth, Part A, is looking at a student's prior year performance relative to their current year performance and determining whether or not there was enough growth on that assessment for that student to be considered as grown. The relative performance, however, is not really so much at the individual student level, but the campus or the district as a whole, using a regression formula comparing your performance to your rate of low socioeconomic status students. Domain 3, closing the gaps, is where we bring in all of those federal requirements. So there are 14 different student groups, including the various race and ethnicity categories, special education, as well as formerly in special education, both those continuously and non-continuously enrolled students, looking at that mobility piece, our English learners, and then economically disadvantaged students. So as you can imagine, students fall in multiple groups when we're talking about closing the gaps and those various aspects. So each of those student groups is compared against an achievement target that's set by the state. Mathematical calculations then result in that overall domain grade. So again, for 2021, because of the public health and safety circumstances and inability of us to fully measure across the state, we are not rated declared state of disaster in each domain, as well as overall at the district and every campus. Additionally, there were no distinction designations for the 2021 year. All right, so let's shift our thinking to something that we historically have enjoyed spending more time on than those state systems that are imposed upon us. Community-based accountability is a system that we choose to engage in here in College Station ISD. You can see the definition there on the right. That was developed through our work with the Texas Public Accountability Consortium because we truly believe that this is a much more meaningful, localized system that goes well beyond those standardized assessments and truly provides an opportunity for us to look at all of these various aspects of the work that we do as public educators and evaluate, where are we doing well, where do we need to improve, and then how do we continue to evolve and change. And that really is the purpose of community-based accountability. It's not to put out a report and tell everyone all the wonderful things and look through that lens of positivity only, but to say, really, what is it that we value and how do we measure that? And then how do we continue to grow and improve? So we've started with those pillars that we'll look at here in a moment that are consistent across all of the districts that are involved in the TPAC process. And then uniquely to us, developed those key questions about what is important, what do we value about these areas, and then ultimately, what are we going to do as a system to respond to that? What would we accept as evidence? How do we make decisions to continue improving? So let's talk a little bit about the history of community-based, because I believe it really has been about 2 years since we spent some time at the board level engaging in this conversation outside of the alignment that we did with strategic design. So you may not realize that we actually started with this process of community-based accountability back in the 2013-14 school year. This really looked very different than it does now. This was coming out of our work with the High Performance Schools Coalition, which was a composition of 23 districts across the state who were really working together to help inform how we could transform public education. As well as the visioning document that really focused on how can we assess for learning, how can we have accountability for learning. And so that early work was really also looking at how can we also meet the compliance requirements of House Bill 5 to report on community and student engagement. So at that point in the work, we were really looking at what information do we already have and how can we compile that in a way to meet the compliance requirements, but also push us forward in this work. So we dabbled in that for a few years. You can actually go back on our website and see those reports. It was a good first try for us. It was definitely more than most districts were doing at the time. And we even started working with some other districts across the state. Then the Texas Public Accountability Consortium, lovingly referred to as TPAC, came together to really reimagine what can community-based accountability be? How can we design systems that really emphasize all of the work that we're doing in a way that's transparent and that really holds weight with our community? And so at that point, we really shifted from what information do we have to how do we measure what we value? And sometimes that's really hard because that's not always the most quantitative kinds of information available. So in that 18-19 school year, we worked with a committee of stakeholders, some of which are in this room today, to really go through that process of redevelopment and had some really incredible conversations, wonderful product. Unfortunately, what was to be our baseline data collection year, 2019-20, was really cut short due to our lack of ability to gather all of that data that would have happened in that last quarter of the school year. So ultimately, we in spring 2021, as you all know, worked through that process of strategic design and then went back to make sure that our community-based system was tightly aligned, because the last thing we need is a system measuring one thing that's not fitting in with all of the important work that we had just done. It was actually pretty incredible to see how much alignment there was already in existence, because the process was so similar in terms of looking at what is it that we value, what is it that we need as a district, what is it that we need to do moving forward. And so during the 2021 school year, we were able to gather a lot more information, not only because we could do things like complete our map assessment at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, but also because we had some really great survey data with Panorama. And so this evening, I'm going to give you all a little preview of that report. As you may recall, that was part of our engagement with Engage to Learn to help us develop this report. And so it is in the process of being finalized. And so you guys are getting a first peek at just some of the components. Know that everything you're seeing this evening is not the final product. It's not comprehensive of everything that will be in there, but it gives you a good flavor of what that's going to look like. So we, of course, have an overview with those stars representing the 7 pillars in our community-based accountability system. So we'll take just a few minutes and look at each of the 7. So first of all, professional learning quality staff. You know, this is, of course, about having high quality educators and adults in our schools, making sure that the climate is conducive to not only recruiting, but retaining those high quality educators and making sure that we're meeting their needs. And so on the left, you see some panorama data from our end of year survey. I do think it's important to note that there are percentiles there, because this is a normative assessment, how we compare to other districts, but the norms were set prior to COVID. So just, a lens through which to think about that. So the blue bars represent the percent of favorable results. And then you can see the red is the percentile in which we fall relative to our peers around the United States, because there is a very large sample from which to norm these assessments. So even with COVID, you can see we're falling above and well above average with school climate as our campus staff have rated. And then we've got some information on the right about the amount and quality of professional learning. Again, falling above, even despite those limitations in being able to provide a lot of professional development last year, as we needed to ensure that we had coverage in our classrooms and make sure that our staff were able to focus on the main thing during such trying times. Additionally, 96% of our new teacher hires reported that they were satisfied or very satisfied with our new teacher university. And just a plug for those folks that are involved with that, I was approached last week at an event by a parent of her daughter is a new teacher in our district, and she came up and she said, "I just want you to know how phenomenal that experience was." So just so affirming that a lot of the work that we're doing is really supporting this area.
Molly, if you
Yes, sir.
go back, and you touched on this, but I just want to make sure again, because when I initially kind of saw the results, I thought we would have more favorable responses relative to the norm data. So the norm data, we got our survey responses from our folks last year during our
Correct.
COVID times, correct? And the norm data is cumulative from Panorama, so a lot of that data was acquired prior to pandemic.
Correct. The norms
Okay.
were set prior to
Okay.
pandemic.
I just think that's important to understand how that can influence how this looks.
Yeah. And I think it will be really interesting to see as we move forward. Again, this is baseline data. And so we'll be able to see how those numbers evolve and change over time. And, I think we should be proud of the fact that despite those difficult circumstances and the norms being against pre-pandemic times, we still saw our performance above the average, with 50th percentile, of course, being right there in the middle of average.
And you probably said what's most important. It's our baseline. It's our one, so we know where we go from here, right?
This is where we're starting.
And just to make sure, I'm seeing it right, that we're saying, say for teachers, that 67% were favorable, right? But compared to a national norm, you're saying
Yes.
that would put us at the 60th percentile.
That's
So,
right.
Okay.
Right.
Got it.
Because sometimes when you just look at the favorability, you think, gosh, that seems low. But, in the scheme of things, it's not necessarily always low relative to the norm.
And it was in COVID year.
Right. All right. So looking at our next pillar, student learning and progress, this is really looking at not only are students meeting those academic bars, but are they learning and growing over time? And so we've got just a very high level overview of our MAP data on the left. So you've got math, reading, then science. The first two columns in the blue and the, I guess up on the screen, it looks kind of maroon, are really looking at academic achievement, whereas the yellow is looking at growth. So let's start with academic achievement. In the areas of math and reading, you can see there we had about 89% of our students fall in that average to above average range in terms of where they performed at the end of the year. Again, this is normed data, so that's relative to their peers across the nation. Growth, initially, that may be concerning, but what's important to understand is on MAP, you either meet the growth target or you don't. And so if you think again about a bell curve, about half of students will meet it and about half will not. So 50% would put us in a really good place. Obviously, we've talked earlier this summer about the impact of learning during such a challenging time. And again, these are baseline scores, and we had an opportunity to visit with our MAP representative and look at some of our beginning of year data that just was collected over the last several weeks, and are starting to feel really encouraged already about the trajectory of these scores. So looking at the right, you can see just some more general panorama survey results about how families feel regarding the experiences that their students have. So 3/4 of our families reported that their school environment helps their children learn, and just at 2/3 reported that teachers' teaching styles are matching their students' learning styles quite well. And I think it's important to note too that this data, campus principals have it for their specific campus, and so they're really able to use that information in their own feedback and coaching, but also in informing the work at their schools. The next pillar is engaged and well-rounded students. And so one of the areas we identified as evidence there is just how many of our students are participating in things like athletics and fine arts. It's a little more challenging to look at other activities, but we can certainly move towards that in the future. So here we can see we had about 40% of our students participating in athletics in grades 7 through 12, and even more at 46% participating in fine arts. Additionally, one of the aspects of engaged and well-rounded students has to do with communication, and digital communication is a part of that. And so we do have our K through 12 digital citizenship curriculum, and are looking forward to continuing to implement that. Our next pillar is student readiness, looking at are our students well prepared for their next level of education, not only within our system, but then post-secondary success. And so just a couple of examples of this. We've got our college, career, and military ready graduates. You can see our rate there relative to the state. That has steadily climbed up over the last few years as we've been really working to ensure that all of our students are moving towards meeting CSISD BCMR, as well as our SAT and ACT results. That probably comes as no surprise. We always, at the taper report in December or January, really highlight the incredible performance of our students on those assessments, especially relative to the state. And then finally, we have some family survey data indicating that 73% of our families who responded feel that their child's school is preparing them for that next academic year. Shifting to safety and well-being. So this is thinking about not only the physical environment of safety, but also emotional safety and how our students feel. So we've got some good family survey results here about the perceived physical and psychological safety at 75% responding favorably. And then we've got 69% in this baseline year reporting that they feel their child has a strong sense of belonging at school and that the activities are matching their interests very well. Another area of safety, really focusing a little more on the physical side, is the fact that we do annual safety audits, and we really take a very close look at the physical safety of our buildings. In fact, you may recall we've got some aspects of our upcoming bond proposals that would continue to enhance those safety aspects as well. Then we're looking next at community engagement and partnerships. This was very much a part of what was identified within our strategic plan. In fact, Goal 4 is all about cultivating and strengthening intentional partnerships. I think we do a lot of things with a lot of people, but we've not always been the most intentional about really monitoring and tracking and ensuring that it's all aligned. So we're focusing on that 4.1 aspect during year 1 of strategic plan, where we will develop a coordinated initiative for community partnerships. And I would be remiss to not give a shout out to our Education Foundation and the work that they have always done and continue to do to help foster and support partnerships with the community for our schools and our teachers and our students. And last, but certainly not least, our final pillar is fiscal and operational system. So are we using our resources wisely? Are they aligned? Are they supporting our mission and our vision? And I think one aspect that is a good testament to that, you'll see the bar graph there with our historical tax rates. Despite the immense growth in all of the bonds that we have needed to support the increase in facilities and needs over those years, you can see we are actually sitting right there at a very commensurate tax rate to the 08-09 in this current year. Also, transparency. You will find more on our website about our fiscal and operational systems than probably any district in the state. We are incredibly transparent and provide every level of detail that we possibly can to our public. And then during the 1920 year, we received an A or superior rating in that school's FIRST system.
So Molly, on this one, so what you're saying since 08, 09 to last year, because we lowered our tax rate again, even for 21, 22, and we had, I believe, 3-4 bond referendums during the course of that time because of our growth. I think about 40% enrollment growth during the course of that decade. We've had about this, we're back to about the same tax rate as before.
Yes, sir.
Correct? And actually, 21, 22 is less than that, correct, Ms. Strauss? Okay.
I'm going to need one more bar, Mr. Glenwinkle.
1.4 cents less.
It's 1.4, yeah, 1.4 cents less and a 13% drop over that time. Is that correct, Mr. Glenwinkle? Thereabouts?
More than 18 cents, 13.2%, I believe.
Thank you.
So what is next? Well, first of all, we are excited to really pick this up and push forward with TPAC this year. As you can imagine, like so many other things, we were waylaid with our work there as we focused on health and safety. I am very honored to serve on the steering committee for this group, and we have an amazing day and a half designed on October 4th and 5th coming up, where we'll be coming together with all of those districts and really highlight the CSISD story for those folks. And then I'll have an opportunity to facilitate some conversations and just really get re-energized with how we can deepen the work. We have another opportunity for our group in January at TASA Midwinter, and then again in March. And so really what I'm looking forward to is just enhancing that data collection and evidence throughout the school year, and really leveraging this to help us progress monitor our strategic plan, because they very much will work hand in hand. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So when you're saying enhancing data collection, are you thinking actually coming up with some additional metrics? Is that included in that?
Yes. So when we went through this process of alignment with our strategic design committee, one of the things that we did is have them go through and provide examples of what meaningful evidence would be in each of the 7 pillars. And so in this report that will be published here in the next week or so, we'll have a number of those evidence examples, but there are other ideas and suggestions, and I think opportunities to learn from the other districts in TPAC as we come back together. And so we just want this to continue to evolve and be a really important part of our work.
Great, makes sense. Yes. Well, just my comments, and generally so excited to see it, and one, to be able for the district to be able to get some time to get back at it, and I appreciate your time in serving on the TPAC, but also really how your comments about how it's aligning with our strategic plan, right? That's the whole idea. They were kind of both developed from our community, and so they certainly should align. This is just more, even giving us more on some of that data side of it, the evidence that we're doing the things. That's kind of one way that I look at it. The only other comment I want to make is so excited also that we finally got to some of these surveys that we've been talking about, because that really is one way that we can get some of the evidence of the voices from both our folks in the district and in the community. So it's great to get a baseline on some of that. Thank you.
And Molly mentioned this, the survey data, which you were looking at, the district level results. We can dissect that down to campuses, and principals have that information. It gives them tremendous insight into their campus and how things are going and areas they might focus on as well. So the feedback or the data we're getting from the survey that we administered last year, again, very insightful and establishes a baseline. And I think that's what's important. It gives us that starting point to really reflect and evaluate ourselves as we progress. I love that our work is focused along the same lines, because I think we've always had some tremendous work occurring. I just felt like, and y'all have heard me say this many times before, that if we just focus that effort along the same path, the things that we can accomplish. Getting to discuss why it was House Bill 4545, it was about instruction, and the efforts associated with House Bill 4545, while not the path we necessarily would have taken, still complements a priority or one of our strategic plan goals. And then to be able to talk about community-based accountability and the values that were expressed several years ago and the alignment of that with our strategic plan. There's always business stuff to do, but this evening we got to talk about things that are, in my opinion, more important, and that's instruction and the path forward and reflection on the community-based information. This is where we should be given the opportunity, spending our time and efforts in conversation right here.
In regard to that survey data, how satisfied were we with response rates? And, that's...
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually have already met with the representatives from Panorama, our vendor, to talk about the timing of when we would want to do that survey this year. How can we, always improve response rates, because you're never going to have a survey where you get 100% participation. But if we can, from families even get half, that would be an incredible sample and very probably representative overall of our population. One area that we really are going to work with our principals on is how can we strategically get really good response rates from our students all across, because this was a very new process. It was the end of school year. We were trying to time it around state assessments. And so that was definitely an area where we hope to see improvement. We had great response rate from staff and teachers, but students will be the area that we'll continue working on this year.
And if you remember last year, we sent lots of surveys out for all kinds of stuff. And we kind of got toward the end and said, we really need to handle this component of things. And we had surveyed people a whole lot. And that absolutely influences your response rate. And quite honestly, Josh, I don't remember exactly what it was. It didn't stick out to me, but I know that through the course of the year, the more surveys you send out, then it can begin to influence your response rate. This year has been fewer, just our circumstances are a little bit different, but that's absolutely something we'll have to keep an eye on and make sure we're improving upon that as well. Because I do think there's strategies we can incorporate, in particular, to engage and ensure our students are taking the time to do that as well.
Can I just add?
Oh, I was just going to say, 'cause, I mean, those responses, as far as the effectiveness, everything else were good, but at the same time, they could be a lot better. But then the same, people who generally, I shouldn't say this, but if you're not satisfied with things, you're more likely to fill out a survey about it than if you're happy. So I was curious if how effective it was, and if we reached at a level where these were actually reliable numbers, and it sounds like we sort of did.
In some areas more than others.
Okay.
Yeah, the people who respond are the two extremes, right?
Yeah.
The one they don't like it or they really like it.
Yeah.
The other thing that should help, it usually helps survey response, is just when people see the actual data and see the results, right? They know what you're doing with this, right? And so I think that should help. So maybe timing where people have access to this and see it with the survey, that would maybe make them more apt to respond.
And again, I come back to it's all baseline. So how an organization, a district, or whatever improves is you set your marker or your standard, and either you're improving upon that or you're getting worse. So I think we have set the starting line, and so our work will be how do we improve upon all aspects of the feedback and the data that we have utilized for our baseline year. I think that will be the standard. Are we moving forward or not? And if we're not, what reflections do we take from that to adjust how we're doing business?
Yeah, I was going to ask about when the survey, because I vaguely remember it going out, and I remember people telling me that they were surveyed out. So I was very pleased to see this baseline that you have. I also have to say, anyone that has had any kind of a conversation with me knows that this is so very near and dear to my heart. The community-based accountability. And I was actually just thinking about the first time I actually started to understand it and to start talking about it. It was, and we were at TASA, the TASB convention. I think it was 3 years ago. And this was before I talked out loud. And I remember we were there, and Clark, CSISD did a presentation about community-based accountability, and Clark handed me the microphone in front of 150 people. Do you remember this, Molly?
I do.
And he said, well, we have a board member that would probably love to talk about this. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, what? I don't talk yet. And I remember, though, sitting there rambling about, what I'm kind of doing now, but about how I loved community-based accountability because it made us look at and celebrate other things with our students. And I stand by that still to this day. I think that STAR gives us data that we need, absolutely. But our community-based accountability gives us so much more. It makes us a much deeper and richer district. And I think focusing on that, all these different aspects, and really digging and making sure that we are doing this for every single one of our students makes us so much better. And, tonight we get to listen to 2 presentations, one from CTE and another one from Head Start. And I'm looking forward to those because that's just going to emphasize what we are doing here and how important that work is and how it is such a big part of our community-based accountability, giving kids other opportunities and the Head Start, pulling in our families at a very young age. So I love this. I love that that we are doing the surveys and we're pulling all of this together. Thank you for all of your hard work. And I look forward to watching this grow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask one more quick question. I was just curious, you mentioned TASB. Do you know of any good TPAC presentations going on at TASB?
I
don't think y'all are doing one.
Specifically looked for that one,
Yeah.
but I can definitely take a look at the agenda. It is published on the website for the convention now.
Yeah, I haven't dug through it either, but that is obviously another place to learn about other folks. Thank you.
However, there is a very interesting session about teacher incentive allotment occurring on Friday. What time is that, Ms. Perry?
2:15.
2:15, so if your schedule allows.
I don't believe there's any more space in there.
They are in a ballroom, anticipating significant attendance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I was just going to say that, thank you, first of all, but when putting the agenda together that this was going to be discussed, it hit me, wow, it's been a long time. And so it was really good to get this back in front of us and appreciate your work and your presentation. Just thank you very much, Ms. Perry.
Thank you all.
All right, and with that, we are done. So we will adjourn and be back at 6:40. Sorry, we're adjourned.